My name is Denise Murphy. I am with PNC Bank. My role with PNC is I'm a business development officer for a specialized department we call workplace banking. What I do is I actually partner up with companies to provide a complimentary add-on benefit of financial resources and services for employees within those companies that we partner up with. So it is my pleasure, certainly, to be the sponsor and partner for this breakout session for the effective communication during difficult conversations that we're going to be certainly being participation in. Just a couple of reminders and housekeeping items to share with everybody. First of all, where's that little thing? The bios for our wonderful panelists and our host is in the book here, starting on page 8. So as Michelle alluded, Michelle Sakirka had said, this is our Bible, so please refer to that for the bios. A couple other housekeeping items. As you can see, we're being videotaped. We're going to be having time at the end of the session for questions. However, if you'd like to ask a question, just make sure the moderator acknowledges you. Wait for a microphone to come over because we are videotaping. Plus, we also want to hear your questions. So please be mindful of that. Also, we do have the camera in the room. As I said, we're videotaping. So if you do need to get up and move around, please be mindful of the camera, okay? So it is my pleasure, certainly, to introduce our host, Katie Kyros, I'm sorry. She is a political reporter for News 12 New Jersey. Her reporting has taken her from the presidential campaign trail, covering Chris Christie's run to the White House. She started her career at WDVM in Maryland, so it is my pleasure, and further ado, I will certainly have Katie come on up. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, hey guys, I'm so excited to see a full room today, but I'm not surprised because I think difficult conversations in the workplace are everyone's problem. I mean, I've been dealing with it for years, and I definitely still try to work on being as effective as possible at my work communications. Hey guys, there's still a few seats scattered in front if you just want to grab those. And so just to do quick intros, I'm so excited by our guests today because I know they have a lot of stuff to share with us. So down at the end, you can see Lynley Noviello, and she is at Cisco Systems. And then next to her is Louie, who is the manager of R&D support services at ExxonMobil. And then next to her, John Hardiman, who is the public affairs director at the NJM Insurance Group. And down here next to me, Leslie Grossman, chair at VISTAGE, private advisory boards for CEOs, executives, and business owners. So they have a lot of advice and a lot of experience to share today. And I want to start just down at the end. We're going to have each of you just answer this first question, just if there's a theme or something briefly you want to say about it, is just what's been your greatest communication struggle in your career? And Lynley, I thought we'd start with you and just work our way down.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I run a fairly large sales team at Cisco. I've been there over 21 years. I like to say I started when I was 15. And, you know, in sales, you're working with a lot of pretty boisterous, you know, outgoing groups of people that definitely speak their mind, they're hard charging, et cetera. But what I have found in my career at Cisco and before is anytime I've gotten that next promotion, so when I became a vice president, Cisco is a company that has over 75,000 employees, and there's only 450 vice presidents and above. And so when I got that VP title, I kind of went, oh my God, what did I get myself into? And I, at that point in time, struggled with finding my voice. I felt like I joined this group of 450 intelligent, fantastic, experienced group of people, and I kind of lost what my value prop was and my voice on the business, which, looking back on it now, this was about 4 years ago, was just completely ridiculous and all in my own head. So it took a little bit for me to find my voice and represent the business, like what Cisco had promoted me to do. But that was my biggest one. It was a huge responsibility. I was responsible for a multi-billion-dollar business. And I just started to retreat, thinking that I didn't have the wherewithal or the intellect to really do the job. So that was, and I can give other examples of when I've gotten promotions, but that was it about, I felt like I lost my voice, and taking a step back and really thinking what your value prop is and refinding it.
Good morning, everyone. As Katie said, my name's Louie. I am the manager right now of the R&D support area. My career started in the R&D world, so I've been working in R&D for 38 years. And with a science degree, and I think it's very common with many of the people in the science field or engineering field, that they tend to be very introverted, and they want to believe that their work will speak for themselves. So in the challenge that I have had, and I've learned, and I try to coach other people, is that you got to be really mindful as who your audience is. You have to tailor your message for what your audience wants to hear and not what you want to say. Because the whole idea of communication is to be able to sell your idea to the audience. So as a researcher, we might go and do some work, and we could think that's the best research idea, and you want your supervisor manager to run with it and, go ahead and build the big unit and spend a lot of money. But if you can't communicate that idea or address the question that the manager has, because the manager is going to want to know, how are you going to help me make money? Not that this idea is innovative or that I'm going to get a Nobel Prize for it. They want to know how you're going to help me make money. And so my advice to people is always know your audience. Make sure that you're addressing the question that they have in mind. Sell them, get them into, pull them in first, then tell them, show them how knowledgeable you are to sell yourself then again, go and find another set of questions that they have on their mind. But one caution that I would have to say is you also have to be careful of the people that are in the audience. Sometimes they have hidden agenda. There might be people out there that are ready to torpedo your idea. So you need to go ahead and find out who your allies are and put them in the audience to help you out. And go and talk to the people who could be your adversary and find out whether they're concerned. Try to bring them around to have them become your ally. Okay.
So, for starters, no torpedoing agendas today. So I could spend all hour talking about communication struggles, but if I have to think about the one that has been the biggest struggle throughout my career, it's undoubtedly public speaking. So, even sitting up here today doesn't come easy to me, and add to that the fact that my boss is in the room. So I was paralyzed of public speaking during high school and into college, so much so that I failed classes because I just couldn't get myself to go to the class where you had to do the final presentation. I was lucky after I got out of school in 1994 that NJM was willing to take a chance on me, but I decided that I couldn't have this power over me throughout my whole career, and if I kept running from it, sooner or later, it was going to catch up with me. So I decided that I would take that weakness and try and turn it into a strength. The challenge, though, was that in the position that I had, I wasn't, in a role where I would be doing a lot of public speaking or running meetings, chairing meetings, things like that. So I had to look outside of work. And so, I joined the Young Professionals Committee of the Chamber of Commerce, ran different committees for the local Chamber of Commerce, did the unthinkable. I ran for the local school board and got elected, and I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. I ran a second time because I had promised somebody that I would, and I was so young back then I didn't know how to say no to people. So on election night I went to cast my votes, and I voted for 3 people, and one of them wasn't me. So it's true. I lost by 140 votes, and it was one of the greatest nights of my life. So couple of points that I just wanted to make around this topic. One, it's really important to know your strengths. but it's equally important to know your weaknesses and try and identify them and turn them into opportunities. And secondly, you may not always be able to, to find the resources that you need at work, depending on what the specific weakness is. There's a lot of ways that you can help build strengths outside of work. So just something to keep in mind as you think about how you want to get better in different aspects of your career.
So I'm Leslie Grossman, and I am chair of VISTAGE International. That's a worldwide organization of peer groups of CEOs, executives, and business development people that meet together on a regular basis. I'm also a women's leadership coach. And when I think back, it's hard for me because now I do so much training, and I also got trained by so many people myself. It's hard to think about, wow, what was my weakest communication skill? And one of them, I remember, it relates, is that I didn't like to go to networking events because I didn't know how to communicate there with people. How many of you have that difficulty? I mean, I see a lot of heads. It's a hard thing, right? So that was something that I had to push myself into, which I actually did a lot of the things that John mentioned, not as a speaker, but being part of organizations, and learned a couple of things. One, I would always look for the people that maybe they didn't have anyone to network with, and I would go to them to make them feel more comfortable, and that made me feel more comfortable, right? And then I used what I call the C word, curiosity. I became curious about everyone. And when I found that I started asking people questions about themselves and asking more and more, that I felt comfortable and they felt comfortable. So that was the tool that I used, that some of you who may not feel comfortable in networking could also use, is just think about the other person and be interested in them by asking those questions, and then the opportunity opens up for you to talk about yourself. So that's something you might want to try out today.
Yeah, that's fabulous advice already. And so we're going to talk about some more strategies to deal with some of these struggles as we go on. I wanted to start with talking about gender dynamics, and I think a lot of women sometimes feel a level of sexism that rises to different levels in their workplace. Obviously, we've heard about the Me Too movement, and even if it's not rising to sexual harassment, it can still feel complicated to feel heard in your workplace. And so to kick us off talking about this, I actually wanted to go to John, who's kind of our special guest star, our lone man on the stage today, but I know that he's worked with this with his team and just making sure that everyone feels heard. So John, can you kick us off?
For sure. So yeah, so I have the privilege of managing seven people, 6 of whom are women, and some of them are in the room today. At least one of them is, and they have some very critically important jobs at NJM. And by and large, the way that we work through these issues or potential issues is through very open, transparent communication. Now, I will say I've been at NJM for 24 years, so I'm answering this question from having sort of been in a vacuum, and I have not seen a lot of it during my career at NJM. On a personal note, though, I have seen it, and I just wanted to share this story real quick. My wife is a dental hygienist, and she graduated from hygiene school when she was 20 years old, obviously very young, and went to work for a private practice where there was one dentist who was sort of the owner-operator, and 2 hygienists. But early on, she would, we were dating at the time, she'd come home and say that, and just for a lack of a better way of saying it, she would say that, she would hear quite a bit dumb blonde jokes. And so I was a patient there, and I went in, and I actually observed it happening. And we were young, we lacked confidence, we lacked wherewithal. It was a very challenging situation because, this was her first job, and the question about whether or not, she could find another job if she moved on. There was no HR department. This is something that she just lived with for a number of years, and ultimately moved on. What we didn't see coming, and this probably goes for everybody who's been through this, is what the longer term impacts were. So, in her case, after having gone through, the death of her mom and her dad, she started to do a lot of reflecting, as you might expect, about, her life. And this is one of the things that she regrets tremendously. We were talking about it last night. The fact that for so long she let someone have so much power over her, she didn't have the confidence, neither did I, or the courage to stand up and do anything about it. So the point I wanted to make through all of this was, it's not just, if you're in the workplace and you're experiencing sexual harassment, sexual discrimination, there's the immediate impact that it has, but the other thing you need to think about is what that longer term impact will be. And if you allow yourself to be put into that position, that we're seeing it now, comes back to really hurt you. So I think the other part of the question was, how do we combat this? From my perspective, I think the first thing is you have to recognize that there is a problem, and we've started to do that. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody's heard that it's a real problem, and it also doesn't mean that everybody who's heard it is really hearing it. So to me, I think this just has to be something that is constantly reiterated, both publicly and in the workplace. And then the other thing is zero tolerance policy, right? If you are an employer, inappropriate actions need to be met with consequences. And I think it's a long-term play, but the first step is recognizing that an issue exists. So I think we're headed in the right direction in that regard.
And have any of you ladies, had to, yes?
Yeah, so as I said, I started in the oil industry 38 years ago. And back then, I could count on one hand the number of female that was in the organization. In fact, they didn't even have a women's bathroom in the building that I was working. So I had to go across the street to go to the ladies' room. But anyway, working in the oil industry in that time, there was predominantly men. I remember going to the trades area where they were building a lot of the units. You would go in there, and they would have these calendars. And I think you know what kind of calendars I'm talking about, right? They would plaster all over the place. And they were very offensive to me. And so I just had to get up enough courage to bring the issue to the HR department and tell them this is not acceptable. And so it was consistency and reminding them that this is really offensive. And so, after a couple of years, we had a few more female, and we got critical mass to really speak up. But I think that I see our organization change over time. Now we have the zero tolerance policy. But even the little subtle things that the men would get together, play cards, and they would have their little joke, and they would see us coming through, and they, of course, quickly quiet down. But every now and then, a couple of those jokes do slip. And again, we had to bring these things up to the HR and make them aware. And I personally had filed some harassment suits against a couple of the guys in my organization, just to make people know that those behaviors are unacceptable. So I think the last time I had something like this was late 1980s. Our organization now have all these training courses, but the culture that I think that we're trying to foster now is to make sure it's a safe environment for anyone to report, both male and female. It's not just female being intimidated now. It's also the transgenders, the gays and lesbians and so forth in our organization, and make sure that they have a safe space to talk. And we make it very, very clear that, hey, look, if you have an issue, you can't go talk to the HR, and it's all confidential. We do the investigation confidentially to make sure that, it does not propagate. So, but, have the courage to speak up. It's important.
Yeah, I think just in keeping with the theme of having difficult conversations, that is a difficult conversation to go have. Even as passionate as you are about it, as strong as you feel that's wrong, that behavior and what we're seeing is so wrong, taking that step to go have that conversation. And I know in large organizations like at Cisco, we have, great HR support and, anonymous lines you can call, et cetera. I know that doesn't always exist in smaller organizations. But I think as we pave the way for our younger generations, we owe it not only to ourselves, but to the next gen workforce to make the workforce a better place. And we do. I'll go back to me losing my voice for a while. We do have a voice, and we have to take sometimes what feels like a risk to go and report it so that we are working in a work environment where we can all perform at our best. It's part of your culture. It's part of your company's culture, right? So I feel a real strong responsibility. I have someone in my finance team that just came to me 2 weeks ago. She moved to a different team. And I was like, I'm going to fly down to Raleigh and sit down with you and strongly encourage you to go and tell someone about this, because it's just not appropriate and it's not the company I want to work for. So I would just say we need to keep finding our voice and report. And that goes it's not just for women, it's for men as well.
Yeah, I'd like to add something that is in keeping with that theme of finding our voice, but taking a little bit different tact. And that is talking about women's voice at meetings. And there is often an unconsciousness that goes on at meetings. How many of you are at meetings where you're part of the minority of women? You might be the only woman, or maybe there's 2 women, and there's 8 men, that sort of thing, and it's almost like you're not there. Do you ever feel like you're not there? How do we have a voice there, right? I hear from women all the time things like, well, I gave this idea, I got my courage together, shared this idea, and no one acknowledged that I even said anything. And then 5 minutes later, a man in the room gave the same idea, and everybody said, what a great idea this was. Anyone ever experienced that? So that's one of the things that I hear often, from women. And also just not feeling you can speak out and have that voice. And one of the things that I talk to women about doing is it's about having a pre-meeting. And that means, who do you meet with before the meeting takes place to run your ideas by them and get their support? In fact, I know a group of partners that there were 3 women partners and there were 8 men partners. And what happened was the 3 women were having the same kind of problem, and they decided that every evening before the meeting of the partners, they would get together and talk about the issues that they wanted to bring up. And they would agree to support each other when they brought those issues up. And that if someone else took credit for their idea, they would say, yes, that was a great idea when Jane mentioned it 5 minutes ago. Yep. So I think that having a voice in the world, in your company, in your business, is really important. And often those pre-meetings with either one person that you trust or maybe even a group where you kind of prepare for what's going to be discussed. And you agree you're going to support each other in that. Can be a very powerful way of securing your voice. And I've heard cases after women do this, all of a sudden later after this happens at a few meetings, that the group starts listening to them more. So that's a tip.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And so to jump off from there, I wonder if you all have some tips for making sure other people aren't taking credit for your work without coming off as bragging. I know women are sometimes afraid to seem like they're bragging or self-aggrandizing. And just being able to take credit for your work, and also any tips for dealing with a person who might undercut you or interrupt you. And I just wondered if any of you have thoughts about that.
Sure. So I'll talk about some of the tips for maybe managing the credit piece of it. And the first thing I would say is I think it's important to first not assume that someone is doing that intentionally. I think what happens is, you know, when you get people into a room, instinctively, I think they go more toward I than we, and I'm not saying that's always the case, but the first thing I would do is not assume that it's being done purposefully, and then just like the sort of the rule with the email where you write an email and you don't send it until the next day. Same kind of thing here. I mean, if it's something that you've concluded is being done intentionally, I think that you want to be calm about it, and so maybe let a day or two go by, and then to me it really becomes a direct conversation where you start the conversation by saying. You almost ask, their permission. Is it okay if we have a conversation, private discussion, or something I'd like to share with you? And I'd be shocked if the answer was no. So assuming the answer is yes, I think it's important that you be direct, you be authentic, and you tell them what you have observed. Coaching, we were talking about this before the session. Coaching and feedback is the absolute greatest gift you can get in the business world. So the person who is, the one who's taking the credit, having that conversation with them, they may not even know they're doing it. But being able to talk to them about that is one of the greatest gifts that you can give them. The other thing is, you can try and prevent it from happening. First place by modeling credit sharing. You sort of set the example. I would suggest that if you don't have a mentor at work or a number of mentors, that you get one, somebody who is truly invested in your career will always be the person who stands up and speaks on your behalf. And I've been fortunate to have some outstanding mentors, a few of them are in the room today, who have, when John Hardiman wasn't there to stand up for himself, they were there to do it. And then finally, the other point I wanted to make was, executives aren't fooled by the I concept. I remember about probably 10, 12, maybe even 15 years ago, I had my first opportunity to present in our boardroom to our board of directors, the board of directors of one of our subsidiary companies. And I felt like I knocked it out of the park, and I was thrilled. So I go back down to my office, and the CEO, a little while later, shows up at my office door, and I can tell you, I'm not the type of guy that CEOs are going to visit at NJM. So obviously he had something important he wanted to talk to me about. And so he sat down and he said, you did a really, really good job. He said, but I want to share something with you that someone shared with me early in my career. And he put me right at ease by saying that, because whatever he was going to say, he already took the concern out of my mind, because he went through the same thing. And during the presentation, I was using the word I, not intentionally, and not as if to say I'm trying to take credit away from anyone else, but I used the word I all throughout the presentation. And his only point was, you don't have a lot of experience in the boardroom, John, but so what I'll tell you is that the presentation was very well received. It would be even better received if instead of I, you used the word we. And I can't tell you how many people I have helped, coach through different presentations that they're preparing for, different speeches, just by tweaking some of those words, and it changes entirely how the message is received. So that's just a thought. I don't know that you'll ever get around people, you're trying to take credit, but don't be too concerned. Executives know, I think when that's happening.
Leslie, did you? Yeah.
I just wanted to add something, because John's a man, okay? There's a lot of I with men. It's a natural thing. I think with women, we use too many we's. Yes. We don't take credit for the things we should take credit for. So I just want to give the counterpoint to that. to many of you, there may be some of you. Some of you may be I women, but I would venture a guess that most of you are we women, and even when it was you that did something, you say we, and nobody but you did it.
Yeah.
So that's what I want to warn you. It's okay to say I, if it was you. That's the difference,
Yeah,
see?
that's a good point.
And we need to acknowledge, and if someone gives you a compliment and says, this was a great project, you did that, that was so great, if it really was you and not your whole team, just say thank you. A lot of times we'll say, oh, well, it wasn't me, it was the whole team, right? Oh, it was whole, I mean, and not that you shouldn't embrace your team if it was a team thing, absolutely. But be aware that if we're going to move up, there are times when we need to take the credit. The guys always do, even when it's not them. So, of course, I want you to know, I'm not talking about all guys, in any way. But there is a tendency, it's men do a better job at that, in a way. I mean, I applaud them for taking credit. We need to do that too.
Yeah, so saying I at the right time is a good
It's really
tip.
the whole idea of, again, knowing your audience, right? And then also knowing yourself, that I work with a lot of the quiet PhDs, and we have to encourage them and says, look, you need to speak up and take credit for the work that you've done so that we can give you the appropriate recognition, because otherwise we wind up promoting people that did not do the work. We want to make sure that we hear from the people who actually did the work and let the data speak for itself, right? You will get called out if you're not the person who did the work, as John says. Management knows.
I think someone said it great this morning, one of the TED Talk speakers, you're better than what you think you are.
Yes.
So be bold.
Yep.
Yeah, and that can help you get noticed. And so, Lynley, I wanted to start with you on, what's the best way to communicate ideas up the ladder and to really get noticed?
I'd give 3 comments on this. Prepare. So don't just sit down, write an email, and send it off. Someone said, John, I think you said,
Yep.
wait, a day. You get limited, and I'll come back to the next 2, but you get limited exposure up the ladder. So when you do get the opportunity to have that exposure, whether it's in person, an email, a voicemail, treat it as important as it is. You want that executive to walk away and go, I just got a great voicemail from Michelle. It was concise, consistent, and she nailed what the risks and benefits were to the business. So those are the other 2. So it's prepare, so don't take it lightly. Conciseness. I will tell you, if I get an email that is over a page long, I'm not reading it. I mean, I will coach my team. I coach all the time. If my team's sending something to our CEO, we're in a company that is very customer facing, so our executives are in front of our customers all the time. So that means us in sales, we get to communicate with our executive team often. Bullets. Conciseness, that is the key. Like I said, even myself, I will send something back and say, that's great, all the detail, but net it out for me. So net it out. And then the third would be, and I mentioned it, what is the impact? Whether it's a team impact, customer impact, Cisco impact, partner impact, net out like the result. If you have a recommendation, then what is the impact? And I cannot stress enough, you think about what's coming across their desk every day. If you can net it out and really be concise about the impact to the business, you just gained credibility with them as well.
Is it better to be trying to kind of raise your impact with your company up the ladder at regular intervals? Or like I do self-evaluations at work. Do you think it's better to save it for certain times when they're really asking for what you've contributed?
Yeah, it's interesting, at Cisco about 4 years ago, we got rid of our CPC assessments, and there's been goodness in that and badness in that. And so we don't have a formal opportunity to really sell our wares, which means even more as females, back to to our I versus we conversation, you have to be thoughtful about how you're making sure that the impact you're having with your partner's customer's organization is being seen and heard. I always will err on the side of over-communication because, and this is something I learned when I got, the promotion. You go off, they're expecting you go own that business, you go run it. But if you're not checking in and making sure that they understand what you're doing, and I was in the service provider market, which has been a very tough market, people start creating what's going on, which may not even be true. So I would say, when I say over-communicate, and I'm not saying send a daily status, but why not drop a monthly, something about, again, tie it back to the business too, and also be bold too. Say what you've done. So I think there's a balance, but I would err on the side of overdoing it than underdoing it.
Is that what you all have found too? For anyone?
So I've had some experience dealing with our CEOs over the years, and I've learned a lot from the mistakes that I've made. So one of the things I learned early on was don't wait for someone up the ladder to ask you to send them an agenda. Mm-hmm. That's something you should be doing at least several days in advance. And if you have materials in the that you want to discuss at the meeting, you should be sending it that much further in advance, because the point was made that if you think you're busy, how much busier is the person who is that much higher up in the organization. So I would do that. The other thing is I would, if there's a problem that you want to discuss, you should be prepared to offer a solution to that problem. So whether it's the right one or the wrong one, you don't want to just lay that on into the lap of your boss. That's something that I think that you want to be prepared with. And then finally, this was one of the most memorable conversations I ever had at NJM. I without even really intending to do it, I told the CEO that he needed to, it was probably around 4:45 in the afternoon, that he needed to read something that I sent him by the next morning because I needed to do something with it. And it was it was more of a communications mistake than it was a protocol issue. But it just goes to show you how clear you need to be and concise with your communications. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to let that happen again. So
the one tip,
Leslie.
the one tip that I would give people for communication is 7 times 7 ways. 7 times 7 ways. This is like over-communicate, as Lynley said. You need to go ahead and do that. Find the different ways. So if you had to do it informally, you had to do it by email, you need to do it by newsletter, you need to do it by formal report. Be persistent to sell your ideas. And research, that's what we got to do. We got to continue to sell our idea and make sure that it is in the forefront of people and make sure that it's known that it is your idea that you're communicating. So that's why I said 7 times 7 ways, and I have that on my own thing. And communicating even with my boss. So how do I make sure that he gets the key message that I'm getting to him? So if I had to even whisper to his admin or whisper to some of my other peers, just constantly have that message to make sure that is accepted.
I'd like to add a different point of view on this. I love all the ideas that we got here. I think everyone is on point. There's another area that a lot of times we women don't take advantage of, not only to get our ideas up the ladder, but our careers up the ladder. And that is conversations, building relationships, getting to know people personally that could have an influence and an impact on our career. We have to realize that men often are in situations where they can talk about these things informally that we might not be part of. A lot of times they're doing it on the golf course, they go out for a drink afterwards, wherever it is, and these kinds of things. Am I right? Does that happen?
No comment.
Okay, we know it does happen. It is, and it's great. It's great. But it's a little bit harder for us, right? Because we're not there in those informal environments to build the relationship. And then, of course, you've got the whole Me Too type of situation that might make us more nervous about it, right? But what we do need to do is have conversations with people that are influential. That means asking someone, your boss or someone else that could have an influence on your ideas, can I have coffee with you? Could I come in and have a 15-minute meeting with you? I want to talk to you about something. I want to get your ideas on that. We need, we as women often feel that if we work hard, right? And we do, we work so hard, just like we did when we were in school to get an A+. Only in the business world, it's a lot about relationships. So we have to take time out from being perfect, because let's face it, we can't be perfect all the time, although we try. Let's instead use that time to build relationships and talk about what it is we want, what our ideas are, and where we want to go with our careers so that we can move up. So building relationships, and that can be a difficult conversation, right, to have, which we're continuing to go into.
I think that's a great point, and if you're thoughtful about it, it can pay off massive dividends. Like, take, for example, you attending this event. Your companies are typically sponsoring it, right? What about even next year, or if there's another event you're going to, reach out to some executive and say, you have sponsored me to attend this event. I would like to spend 30 minutes with you, even if it's like an interview, asking you some questions about the business, sharing some ideas. I mean, these are great opportunities to get more exposure with your executive team, leadership team. I think it's a great point.
Yeah, and actually a story that I'll share is a woman that I was working with who, in fact, at a big insurance company, she heard the CEO of her company speak, and she wanted to meet him. And she really was looking for a sponsor. You know what sponsors are, right? So after he spoke, she went up to him and she said, oh, I just, what you shared, I got so much insight from it. I wondered if I could have just a brief appointment with you afterwards. I'd like to ask you some questions about your career that might be helpful to me. And of course he said, yes, of course, call my assistant, I'll see you. Well, long story short, after she interviewed him, she also shared with him where she wanted to go in the company. Mm-hmm. He actually offered to be her sponsor. Mm-hmm. And he gave her so much support that she just zoomed up the corporate ladder. So, I mean, that was an outstanding case. But you get the idea. I mean, there are opportunities, as Lynley suggested, to do that. We need to have those conversations.
So real quick, I just wanted to add that to that point, and I'll just open this up real quick to my NJM friends. We have a saying at NJM that the currency by which we trade is, anybody? That's right. That is literally what, that's how we build our success at NJM, and that is cascaded down from very highest level all the way down to staff. So absolutely, that's how we view the ability to find success.
Yeah, you're right. And I think, though, that internally a lot of women don't do that, though. I mean, internally, there's a fear about it. Mm-hmm. At least that's been my experience with, the women leaders that I work with.
Yeah, and I wanted to give a few extra minutes for audience questions, actually. We have a mic. Sorry.
Communications and relationships.
Okay. Well, I think we do, though. Is it okay if we start the audience questions now? Or if we have the mic somewhere? Or do I have it? I don't have it. There it is. So if anyone has questions, if you want to just raise your hand, I just wanted to kind of get a conversation going. Any questions?
Every question is a good question.
For any of our panelists? Yeah. I think we have one right over.
Up in front, yeah. Over here.
Over here.
Oops, right over here. Yeah, it goes just on, and then it takes like 10 seconds, I think.
Yeah, let's ask the newswoman there. She'll know how to turn the mic on.
Yeah, I should know that.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning still. What are your suggestions for dealing with the bully? When you're in the position and you feel like you're being bullied, how do you find your voice there, and what advice do you have?
Has anyone dealt with bullies?
So I'll start. I won't say what my first response would be, but no. Seek to understand. Like, try to figure out what's going on there, before maybe going and asking, on a frontal attack there. But I'd try to seek to understand. I'd start talking to other key influencers and people you can trust, and seek to understand what's going on there, because there might be something there that you'll get some tidbits where then when you do go approach the person and have a conversation. So I'm always a fan of being authentic, transparent, and hitting it head on. But I would, again, back to my prepare a little bit, like try to find out some further information to help you have a talk track to go speak directly to the person. That's always my suggestion, rather than going to like a manager. I mean, talk to your manager about like maybe even doing a role play. Or if your manager is the bully, that's a whole nother conversation. But seek to understand, prepare, and have the conversation, and do it with an open mind too. So how would you suggest maybe we can work better together? That would be my approach.
Yeah, in the workplace, I would actually encourage people to go to the supervisor to let them be the intermediary to mediate the conversation, because we really don't know whether it is a personality thing, or is it somebody's trying to take ownership of work, or there's just some hidden agenda behind it. So have a supervisor, they could identify a neutral party to mediate that conversation. But yeah, I just, the last thing I want in the workplace is for that bullying thing to escalate because they did not bring it up to their supervisor's attention.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Yuck, when you were going, to HR, you were talking about years ago with other discrimination issues, did they listen to you right away, or did you have to kind of work on how you were communicating the problem to make them get it?
No, the HR was very, very supportive. I mean, we had to go through the investigation and so forth, but everything was kept confidential when, it was addressed. And at the end, I did have to sit down and have that confrontation or the face-to-face with that individual, and he understood where I was coming from, and we had the listening, so I also understood. But it was just good to be able to see each other's perspective after we had somebody to mediate. I think I really did not feel comfortable enough to go to that person directly and say, why I felt that you were harassing me.
Mm-hmm. That's so true. Any more bullying? Okay. Any more questions? Oh, fabulous. We have the second row.
What would be the top ways that you would confront performance issues? How to have that off-the-bus conversation, and how to best communicate that? I've heard about, the good news, the bad news, the good news, but in this case, there is no good news. So how would you communicate that? I'm personally a manager, and I have colleagues who as well struggle with that, and it's very difficult to have that conversation. We work in healthcare.
Giving the bad news. How do you do it?
Yeah, so I'll take a shot at that one. And again, this is having been on the receiving end. And it wasn't that bad, but it was. I was given the gift once of a very direct conversation with our former CEO, and I say it's a gift because he cared enough to share with me some observations that I would not have recognized. And so whether it's performance related or it's otherwise, I call it a gift because but for that conversation, I may never have known that, there was room for improvement or to do things differently. So where I'm going with it is, if it's a performance-related issue, to me, the best way to handle that is it's a direct conversation, which is, as painful as it might be, honest and transparent, and you look at it like you are giving this person a gift. And the gift of coaching, the gift of feedback is, can be the difference between whether or not they succeed and whether or not they fail. And you don't want them to fail. You want them to succeed. So I personally responded very well to the direct feedback, and it stung a little bit, but it also, I think, it's what I needed. So that would be my approach.
So my suggestion is, when you have that conversation, that first conversation with that person, hopefully it's not the first time this person's hearing about it. You got to address the issue when you first see it. Don't wait until you say, well, I got to build a case for this person. You got to give them the little feedback and says, hey, look, this is what we're observing. This is what we need you to do to improve your job performance, but also for your own job satisfaction, your own benefit. But once you get to the point where that person need to get off that bus, you need to be really, really frank with that person, because maybe they're better off on another bus and they will be able to accelerate.
The downtown bus.
Yeah. And we had to do that. We had let people go. I personally had to let people go. But you know what? They found another job and they're excelling. But just in our particular environment, the work that we're doing, that was just not. So it is a gift for you to give them that honest feedback, to say, hey, look, this is just not working out for you. But do it in such a way that it is gradual and, building it up over time. Not a big surprise. We have these annual performance, and we always tell folks, you should not be hearing exactly where your performance is at during that time. You should be doing monthly, or if it's 6 months or whatever, depending on the person's needs. But you got to be consistent and persistent.
Just one added comment. Expectations of the role need to be clear and understood, because if that individual has a different understanding of what their performance criteria is than what you have, it's going to be like two ships sailing in the night. So getting that expectation setting on the table, I think, is really important.
And a quick resource for everyone. There's a book that has been my Bible for 20 years. It's called Fierce Conversations. And that is a solution for every difficult conversation. There's scripts in there. And it's been reprinted about 20 times. It is a bestseller and a great tool. So that's something you might want to have in your library if you're managed people, or everyone has, even in your own personal life, the tips that are in there are extremely helpful.
I think we have a question there in the fifth row.
I just wanted to ask, continuing on that same conversation, do you have any tips on how to ensure that when you get this person off the bus, that you don't create a negative environment for the rest of the company or the rest of the company, when it's somebody who's been in the company for 20 years and it's not working out and you have to remove them? How do you make sure that everybody else is going to be okay with moving forward?
That's a tricky one.
You know what? Most of the people in your organization is probably already aware of that person's performance, okay? But I think that when you have to dismiss that person, you do it with empathy, right? To make sure that they leave with their pride and
treat
their
them
dignity.
as you would want to be
dignity
treated.
leaving, because again, you're trying to set them up to succeed in wherever path that they need to go.
And I think Yuck is right that in that situation, it probably would not come as a surprise if it's been something that's been manifesting over time. But let's say it was a surprise. One thought is hearing a clear message from, your leadership team about, and I, in this case, thinking maybe like a high level termination. Your leadership team can, even if it's just walking through the building and talking to different, officers or managers or other key employees, letting them know that, yep, this happened, but this doesn't change our mission, this doesn't change our focus, is one way that you can reiterate, continuity to employees. So just something to think about.
I agree. I think not addressing it, you don't have to go into the situation of what happened with the employee. You want to respect that. But kind of not addressing it allows people to make up their own story. And that, I'll never forget, I was fortunate to go to a Jack Welch training for 3 days. And I have a handful of things I took away, but one thing was define the crisis before someone else defines it for you. Yep. And that's something, again, exactly what John said, like communicate it. Again, you don't have to go into the details of what transpired, but reinforce the positive things they're doing, their mission, address it.
Okay. Do we have more time? Can we do another? Oh, we have one back here.
So I think obviously the questions and feedback are great when you're working in the corporate environment, but when you're a solopreneur, it's a little bit different. So I'm actually sitting here with my laptop because I've got my teammates, obviously my staff working on other projects, but there's those difficult conversations that you have to have with clients sometime. And I actually had to fire my first client ever this week, and I was freaking out over it. So this would have been a great kind of conversation to have beforehand. So I think those conversations are a little bit different, and I don't know if you guys have any experience or any feedback on that.
Kind of on having to let someone go when you're not faced with
When they're a client.
clients. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yes. Well, I've had quite a few. And even around really bad behavior, like sexual harassment behavior, which we will not tolerate it, and we go straight to their top and have the tough conversation. I think you need to work with you don't have an HR department, but I think you need to look back, what are the values of your organization, even if it's a one-person organization, and be able to sit down with a client and say, this is what we value, this is the work environment that we thrive in, this is not working for us because of XYZ, we wish you all the best. But again, goes back to preparing a little bit and not having that quick reaction of, oh my God, I can't believe they're doing that. But just go back to kind of have the values. And it's a tough one because who wants to turn away a customer, right? I mean, really. But I think if you do it the right way, it sometimes works out even better for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Lynley. And I don't know if this client, and because I had an agency for 15 years, and one of the things, though, that I had to fire clients, but I also had clients that I thought I might be able to change that behavior. And one of the techniques that I used to use is I would say to them, I don't think we're the right agency for you. And here's why. And then bringing up the things that Lynley would talk about, which gave them the opportunity to either say, oh, I wasn't aware, we won't do that, blah, 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 or not, just walk away after that. So that worked for me very well, that I don't think we're the right company for you.
You guys have been so great, and I just want to thank you all for coming, and I want to just give our panelists a hand because they had such great experience.